Oops. Why do you leave that right there? Okay, we are expecting, on our membership list, we had 17, but we're not going to wait because I was taught in my press conference training, you start on time for the press. So it is 10:05, I apologize, I should have started right on, but anyway, I'm going to welcome everybody. Everyone's seated. And we're going to start with our African affirmation. I can pick this up on here, right. Whew. So first off, I'm Bernadette Hamilton Reed. I am the Administrative Assistant for the African Nova Scotian Decade for People of African Descent Coalition. So our affirmation says, the African Nova Scotian Decade for People for African Descent Coalition acknowledges and requests the presence of Mother Africa and our ancestors whose teachings, strength, and perseverance continue to challenge and inspire our community. The ANSDPAD would like to acknowledge that we are in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. This territory is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship. ANSDPAD recognizes that African Nova Scotians are a distinct founding people in Nova Scotia who have been a key part of the province's culture and history. The Coalition's mission is to build strength and health across Nova Scotia, Nova Scotian communities, and to forge renewed working relationship with governments that creates conditions for all African descended people in Nova Scotia to thrive. Ashe. All right, so I'm going to be the moderator for today's events, and we have several pieces of information that we're going to be sharing with you today about the African Nova Scotian Justice Institute and the important work that we will be doing. First, I'm going to let you go through the agenda, and then we'll call our speakers up. So we've had our affirmation. Thank you for participating in that. We're going to have Brandon Roll speak first, and then he will be followed by Robert Wright, and we'll have Faisal Mirza, who is going to call in, and then we'll finish with Vanessa Fells. We will provide an update on the activities of the African Nova Scotian Justice Institute and the African Nova Scotian Policy Strategy. And after that time, we will allow time for questions. So we did our affirmation again, thank you. So I'm going to read Brandon's bio, and then we're going to invite him to the stage. So give me a moment to get his bios. All right, so Brandon Roll and Lee Seshagiri acted as a co-counsel for the intervener for ANSDPAD in R.V. Anderson. Brandon is a graduate of the 2009 class of the School of Law at Dalhousie University and was called to the Nova Scotia Bar in 2010. He worked in private practice for a short time, then joined Nova Scotia Legal Aid in 2013. Since 2017, Brandon has been the managing lawyer of the Halifax Youth Justice Office. Brandon is co-chair of the Equity and Racial Diversity Committee within Nova Scotia Legal Aid and also a member of the Racial Equity Committee and Criminal Standards Committee with the Nova Scotia Barristers Society. He is a member of the board at Homebridge Youth Society and sits on the African Nova Scotian Access to Justice Judicial Committee. Brandon is passionate about issues of race and culture for African Nova Scotian clients and continues to advocate these issues in the courtroom and in the profession at large. I present to you Brandon Roll.
Thank you so much, Bernadette. Just one minor correction.
Okay.
Faisal's not able to join us this morning, though we acknowledge the important work that he did representing the Criminal Lawyers Association for Ontario in this case.
Great, thank you.
So as Bernadette mentioned, my name is Brandon Roll, and I work at Nova Scotia Legal Aid. And along with my colleague, Lee Seshagiri, we were privileged to be able to act as counsel for the intervener in this case, the African Nova Scotian Decade for People of African Descent, or ANSDPAD Coalition. And of course, we're extremely pleased with the outcome in this case. We can't talk about the impact of race and culture assessments without acknowledging that they were created here in Nova Scotia and first introduced here in Nova Scotia. And they were created by Robert Wright, who's here with us today. So thank you, Robert, for your leadership and commitment on these issues. And thank you, Vanessa, as well, for your leadership with the ANSDPAD Coalition, which has made a tremendous impact in the justice system as well. I also have to acknowledge all of the people who have been working on these issues for generations and waiting for moments like this. You know, we've been fighting and advocating for so long that we rarely take time to celebrate wins, and I can say unequivocally that this is a win for African Nova Scotians. The Anderson decision is a historic decision that signals a shift in the landscape when we talk about sentencing African Nova Scotians. This decision will directly impact every African Nova Scotian being sentenced from this point forward. African Nova Scotians are a distinct people with a unique history, and this decision acknowledges that historical reality. This case was about a young man, Rakeem Anderson, being sentenced for possession of restricted firearm and other weapons offenses, and Chief Judge Williams of our provincial court sentenced him to a conditional sentence order followed by probation, so essentially a community-based sentence. And that was in large part because of the information that she received through the impact of race and culture assessment in that case. And the Crown appealed. And as we know, the Court of Appeal ultimately upheld the sentence. But when the Crown appealed, they invited guidance from our highest court about how to treat factors of race and culture in a sentencing proceeding. So when they made that decision to appeal, this case, respectfully, became about something larger than Rakeem Anderson. It became about how we sentence African Nova Scotians generally, and how we're going to begin to tackle the issue of overrepresentation of African Nova Scotians in the justice system. As I said, this was framed as a guidance appeal, and as interveners, and through the coalition, and also through the umbrella of the African Nova Scotian Justice Institute, we were able to reach out directly to community to provide feedback on how we framed our submissions. And by doing that, we were able to bring the voice of African Nova Scotians into the courtroom at the highest level. You know, it's rare to be able to stand up at the Court of Appeal and talk about things like slavery and colonialism and the lived experience of African Nova Scotians in the justice system. And that's what we had the opportunity to do in this case. If we think about the context, we had 5 sitting justices, which we don't often see at the Court of Appeal. So we knew from the outset that we had the court's full attention. We also had interveners from not only Nova Scotia but Ontario. And we ended up with a unanimous decision. So clear direction to our lower courts. This is now the law in our province. This is also happening at a time when Nova Scotia is leading the country on issues of race and culture. So it's fitting that our Court of Appeal has taken a leadership role nationally on these important issues. So I'll just talk about a few main takeaways from the decision, and then I'll pass it over to my esteemed colleagues. First of all, the court didn't shy away from taking these issues on, and I think they're to be commended for that. The court affirmed that IRCAs are the best way to get information of race and culture before a sentencing judge, sort of validating the work that Robert and others have done. The court also said that IRCA should be available any time an African Nova Scotian is being sentenced. And it may be an error of law to ignore these factors. And that's an important piece because that was a live question. When do we order these reports? Under what circumstances? And the court has endorsed the approach of any time an African Nova Scotian is being sentenced, these reports should be made available. That's a huge step forward. This decision also endorses a comprehensive framework for the application of IRCAs at every stage of sentencing. So this decision is not just about when it's appropriate to impose a conditional sentence order. It's a direction to judges that the evidence of race and culture is a lens through which to apply all sentencing principles. Another step forward. Importantly, the court also said that judges must be able to show how they factored in the evidence of race and culture. So it's not good enough to say, I've considered it. It's not good enough to simply acknowledge this evidence. You have to show how you've applied it to your sentencing decision. And if you don't, that could be grounds for appeal. So it's a message to everyone in the justice system that the application of IRCAs at sentencing is a necessary step to address historical inequities and the over-incarceration of Black people in this province and in this country. And at its core, for me, this decision affirms that African Nova Scotians will be seen completely in the eyes of the justice system when they show up for sentencing. You cannot divorce someone from their cultural identity, and for so long, that's what we've been doing. And moving forward, the law says this can't happen any longer, and that the history and lived experience of African Nova Scotians will be taken into account at sentencing. And that's why this decision is so important. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brandon. That is exciting news, and I know that our community and everyone who's watching is excited about that news. And please, we will be holding community consultations to talk more about what this means to our community. So stay tuned to the DPAD News. Next, we're going to have Robert Wright. Robert Seymour Wright is a social worker and sociologist whose 31-year career has spanned the fields of education, child welfare, forensic mental health, trauma, sexual violence, and cultural competence. A clinician, academic, administrator, he has always integrated his work with delivering direct practice clinical service to clients with teaching and supervising interns and promoting lasting systemic change through social policy and advocacy. He also consults, trains, speaks, and comments on a wide range of issues. His extensive pro bono work gave birth to the People's Counseling Clinic, a nonprofit mental health clinic. His pioneering work with colleagues in cultural competence and conducting cultural assessments has received national attention, and he is the father of IRCAS, and he will talk about the development of his IRCAS. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernadette. I'll try to keep my comments very, very brief. I think that the greater value in our time might be to allow questions around the day. And so I've just prepared a few comments. Bernadette has ably introduced me. I'm Robert Wright. I'm a social worker, sociologist. I work at the People's Counseling Clinic, which is just across the street here, actually. So I'm in the neighborhood. Impact of race and cultural assessments, or IRCAs as they have come to be known, are, as Brandon mentioned, a made in African Nova Scotia, highly specialized, enhanced pre-sentence reports that are designed to give sentencing judges more significant and contextualized information about the background factors affecting people of African descent. Professor Maria Dugas, in her paper, Committing to Justice, the case for impact of race and cultural assessments in sentencing African Canadian offenders, acknowledged that IRCAs provide this systemic anti-Black, provide the court with necessary information about the effect of systemic anti-Black racism on people of African descent. They connect this information to the individual's lived experience, articulating how the experience of racism has informed the circumstance of the offender, the offense, and how it might inform the offender's experience of the carceral state. She goes on to say that IRCAs are necessary in the light of the historical and ongoing systemic anti-Black racism present in Canada and its effect on Black Canadians' lived experiences. The prevalence of anti-Black racism is directly connected to the history of slavery and the subjugation of people of African descent in Canada. If you haven't read Professor Dugas' paper yet, I think that would be kind of an essential primer to understanding IRCAs. We are fortunate in this province to have African Nova Scotian lawyers and academics and clinicians who together have been able to craft this tool, not only for people of African descent here in Nova Scotia, but for people across our country. As the pioneer, or the godfather of IRCAs, as I've sometimes been described, I can only say how humbled I am by how this tool has been taken up by the courts and how useful they have become in assisting the courts to address and begin to rectify the well-documented systemic anti-Black racism that permeates our criminal justice system from stem to stern. That permeation of the criminal justice system of anti-Black racism and systemic racism was acknowledged quite poignantly in the Donald Marshall Jr. wrongful conviction inquiry decision, which means that IRCAs, as they are practiced are useful to sentencing courts. But the work remains to address systemic racism in individuals' first contact with police, on the whole course of adjudication in terms of charges, what charges, the kinds of evidence that are held at trial, even in decisions as to whether or not to proceed with charges. We need to be factoring in these decisions at every single aspect of the course of the criminal justice system, as I say, from stem to stern. Some will remember that I was the writer of the IRCA in the first case in which this tool was used, the RVX decision. It was a very different decision in that it was a juvenile or youth-related case. In that case, it was noted that IRCAs were an essential tool in that case to help the court, which was being asked to do to make a very significant decision in adjudicating a juvenile individual, a youth, as an adult. And the court acknowledged that the IRCA was absolutely essential in helping them to better understand that young person. In fact, the IRCA in that case stood alongside three other what are called Section 34 or psychological reports that are submitted to youth courts prior to sentencing. So the IRCA stood alongside three other reports that had been prepared by individuals who are commissioned to prepare these reports for all youth who are being adjudicated in Nova Scotia. And the court found that the IRCA was more helpful than the other reports. It's sad, but I think that at that time, of those three other reports, only one even mentioned, and just in passing, that the subject of the report was a person of African descent. And that report only mentioned it in a descriptive kind of way. We've come a long way from that, when such reports could be submitted in a completely racially devoid manner, to this day, in which courts are recognizing that in sentencing people of African descent, all of these factors that are involved in IRCAs must be present in order for courts to be able to arrive at a just sentence. So we've come a long way from 2014 till today, and I thank my colleague Brandon Roll for his comments, his insightful comments there. I'd just say this, that in the Anderson appeal decision, the court said that the sentencing of African Nova Scotian offenders must evolve. This is to be accomplished by judges taking into account evidence of systemic and background factors and the offender's lived experience, ideally developed through an IRCA. At every step in the sentencing process and in the ultimate crafting of a just sanction, Mr. Anderson's sentencing shows that change is possible for the offender and, as significantly, for our system of criminal justice. We celebrate these things here in Nova Scotia, and I think it's appropriate given that we are the home of Canada's oldest and largest black communities. But I'm also thrilled that the federal government has acknowledged the value of IRCAs and have included them as an important tool, as they have recently announced funding to address systemic racism in the Canadian criminal justice system. The People's Counseling Clinic, the clinic where I am housed and where I work, in partnership with the African Nova Scotian Justice Institute, an institute of the African Nova Scotian Decade for People of African Descent Coalition, we have been commissioned by the federal government to recruit and train IRCA assessors across the country. So that the experience and the work that we have accomplished here in Nova Scotia can be spread from, as we say, sea to sea to sea here in Canada. Because people of African descent exist in all parts of Canada. And sadly, their experience with systemic anti-Black racism is present wherever they are. And so we're proud that to be recognized by the federal government for the work that we have done, and we are proud that the federal government has seen fit to take up this cause of addressing systemic anti-Black racism in the criminal justice system, and have asked us to lead in the training of IRCA assessors. Unfortunately, our colleague Faisal Mirza from Ontario, who was the lawyer who represented the Criminal Lawyers Association of Ontario as an intervener in the Anderson case, unfortunately he is not able to be here today. But an organization that he helped found in Ontario called the Sentencing Project will be a partner in the national rollout of IRCAs. Here in Nova Scotia, we have been asked to lead the training and the recruitment of assessors, and the Sentencing Project has been asked to take the lead in judicial and lawyer education around the same project. And so we look forward over the next couple of years to be working closely with our partners in Ontario, closely with our colleagues in legal aid across the country, closely with our colleagues in the Federal Department of Justice, in rolling IRCAs out across the country and making that tool and the Anderson decision live from sea to sea to sea. So I want to thank you for this time and for your interest today, and I'll give Bernadette back the podium.
So, thank you to the godfather of IRCAs. Thank you, Robert. We appreciate that. As you can see, this is a very important announcement that's going on, that's going to take place across the country. So we thank Robert for his work. And again, as he mentioned, Faisal is not here. And again, Brandon, for your esteemed work throughout this. And now we're going to call upon our Director of Operations of the African Nova Scotian Decade for People of African Descent Coalition, Ms. Vanessa Fells. So Vanessa was born into a large family in the African Nova Scotian community of Yarmouth. Her family believed that in order to support our community, you need a good education, economic freedom, and to be a critical thinker. Taking this to heart, she completed 2 bachelor's degrees in 6 years, and then completed a Master's of Education in Afrocentric Policy in 2013. In 2015, Vanessa represented Canada in the United Nations Human Rights Fellowship Program for the International Decade for People of African Descent in Geneva, Switzerland. Vanessa is dedicated to enhancing and advancing her community, and she is the Director of Operations, as I said, for ANS DPAD Coalition. I give you Vanessa Fells.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I'm going to take a very brief few minutes and just give you some updates about the Justice Institute, some of the programs that it will house, as well as an African Nova Scotian policing strategy that the Coalition and our Justice Working Group have been proposing to government as well as policing agencies for a few years, and what we hope that will look like as well. So as you know, in mid-July, I think it was the 12th, the government announced funding for an African Nova Scotian Justice Institute. The Justice Institute will be both proactive and reactive in its approach in response to anti-Black racism experienced by African Nova Scotians and their interactions with police, the courts, the prison system, and related systems, as well as providing legal education to African Nova Scotians based on their needs and concerns. And this will be province-wide. Some of the programs that the Justice Institute will house, as we already know, Robert has brought it up, race and cultural assessments and treatment services. So that will house IRCAs. So when IRCAs are asked for by the courts, it will go to the Justice Institute. We will have a clinician and staff there who will field those out to assessors who will write them. There will be data collection as well as Police Accountability Unit, because we all know data is extremely important when it comes to justice. We need to know what is going on in our communities and how is it affecting our communities. Data is extremely important for that. Police accountability, that will be part of our justice strategy, which I'll get to in a minute. An African Nova Scotian court support program, so there will be support staff to help African Nova Scotians and guide their way through court services, because many people have issues sometimes when they're trying to get to the courts. A bail alternative incarceration support and reintegration program. An alternative justice and victim services support program. Public legal education and youth development program, so there will be a youth worker to help educate youth, as well as a human rights and police accountability program. So just a little bit about the police accountability program. That is where our policing strategy will come in. So what we at the coalition have proposed to government as well as policing agencies across the province is a collaborative approach to and a new way forward for policing. As we all know, there are issues and trust issues with the African Nova Scotian community and police, and that starts from the first interaction sometimes that we have with police. So what we have proposed is to present a new way forward to address the past, the present, and the future and that relationship with police and community. It will take into account the historical factors of African Nova Scotians as a distinct people, as well as present day issues and how those link together. It will be developed and led by the African Nova Scotian community. And it will also work collaboratively with government and policing agencies across the province. And so what we hope to do is to bring everyone together, community and policing agencies, to develop a strategy and a way forward. So we're hoping that we'll have community consultations, community input, as well as being able to work collaboratively with, like we said, police and government. I think those are all the updates that I have. I wanted to keep it short and sweet.
That's great.
So I will ask now, I guess I'll bring Robert and Brandon back up if there are any questions.
Stay there, I'll forward.
Oh, yeah.
Mr. Wright, just a question for you here. 31-year career, how significant is it for you to have this report finally in the courts, to see this finally kind of moving forward? Can you maybe speak to just from your perspective on that?
Well, I've been thinking about this since the decision came out. The decision came out, I printed it, and I went for a walk and sat under a tree and read it, and had a very emotional experience, if I can share that. But I would say I've had a rather Forrest Gump-like life. My life has been touched by extremely powerful individuals who have been dedicated to making significant change in society, and it seems like at very key points in my life I was shaking hands with these giants, and they have helped to shape and mold my life, and so I think that from 2014, when I was asked and commissioned to write the first IRCA, till now, I've been connected. And so I say it's humbling because I don't really feel like I was the driving force behind this work. I feel more like I was the tool being used by some larger force. And I have to say that this work would not have occurred but for those African Nova Scotians who have been living lives of sacrificial leadership throughout our history. You know, the Carrie Bests of the world, the Rocky Joneses of the world, these individuals who were models to us and taught us how to live a life that is not just about self-service but about community. And then when I began to do this work, my colleagues who were eager to join that work. Lana McLean, most notably, my colleague and comrade in arms, who took up IRCAs and continued to press it, and then the small cadre of assessors. Natalie Hodgson actually was the writer of the assessment in the Anderson case. I was the co-author and supervisor of that assessment. So these individuals who have, who are themselves people of African descent, who are not afraid to dive deep into the issue of racial trauma and systemic discrimination, and articulate that from their locations in these reports. I guess these are all of the things that I think about. In my career of 31 years, I would say it's been, it almost feels like too short to have come this far. But we accomplished it through the efforts of a very large and dedicated team of people.
And I think of the people who haven't benefited from this in the criminal justice system, who are now incarcerated, who didn't have this kind of report. How are they ever going to be able to benefit from this at all? Like, how is that going to work for those who are already been sentenced?
That's a great question, and I think it's something that Justice Derrick touched on in the decision when she was talking about when to impose conditional sentence orders, and recognizing that historically people have not had the benefit of sentences that were culturally informed. Listening to an interview yesterday that Robert and Vanessa did a while back, where a caller called in and said, I had a cultural assessment, and it was great in that case. And then the next time I came to court, the judge took 5 minutes and just skimmed over it and didn't really apply it. And I think the message from this case is that's not going to be allowed to happen moving forward. So retroactively, it would be difficult, I think, to apply it to cases that have already been sentenced, but certainly a clear message from the Court of Appeal that moving forward, judges are going to be held to a certain standard in terms of applying this information.
And how far-ranging is it going to be? When are we going to start to see the impacts of this? Is this retroactive right now? Is this going to happen, today?
It's been happening. These reports have been ordered since 2014. Now we're just seeing the validation from our highest court saying that this is the appropriate way to sentence African Nova Scotians. And I think with the national rollout of IRCAs across the country, we're going to see more stories about these reports and more uptake across the country. But here in Nova Scotia, certainly we've been leaders in changing the way that we sentence African Nova Scotians. And I don't think we have to look much farther than this specific case where Mr. Anderson would have gone to jail for 2 or 3 years, but for the IRCA. So it's having an impact right now, and hopefully with stories like this, the uptake will continue, and certainly again that there's a clear message from our highest court about how we're going to sentence African Nova Scotians.
We all appreciate just how significant this is. I just want to ask both of you. You both know, that there are going to be people out there who are going to say, oh, well, here comes the special treatment, and we know why this is happening. We know all the history. I just want to get your reaction to, what are you going to say to those people, those critics? Robert, can I start with you?
Sure. I think you're right. I think that there are some folk who think about these things and they will say, oh, well, black folk are now finally they're going to start getting special treatment. Actually, IRCAs are about finding just decisions for people of African descent. And the science, the research shows that black people have been dramatically overrepresented in the criminal justice system. And not just in terms of their number, but in terms of the severity of the sentences that they receive, the level of security with which they are housed, the length of their sentence that they serve in jail as opposed to in community with early release and other kinds of programs. So this is a move towards justice, not a move to kind of preferentially treat individuals. In order to understand that, we need to understand that our system up until this moment, the standard has been injustice for people of African descent.
Brian, can I get you as well?
Yeah, sorry. I grabbed my binder because Justice Derrick actually has a very nice quote on this very issue And we know that that's sort of,
You know what's gonna come up. There are gonna be people there.
yeah, absolutely. And I guess what I would say is that that narrative has been rejected by the Supreme Court of Canada, and when people start talking about discounts for racialized offenders. And I just wanted to read the quote from Justice Derrick because it touches on this very issue. And she says, "Respect for the law and the maintenance of a just, peaceful, and safe society is not achieved by putting disproportionate numbers of Black and Indigenous offenders behind bars, having left unaddressed in the context of sentencing the deeply entrenched historical disadvantage and systemic racism that more than likely had a hand in bringing them before the courts." So that's what Robert's talking about. This disproportionate treatment that we've received for centuries is now starting to be ameliorated, and that is the answer to that sort of narrative that, well, you're getting preferential treatment. No, we're now getting equity. We're now starting to get equal treatment. And so that's the way the law is moving, and our highest court has recognized it.
Also, I was just reading here as well. On August 13th, Federal Minister Justice David Lametti announced $6.64 million over 5 years. Can you speak to how that specific dollar figure came to be, and how around why it's going to cost $6.64 million?
Can we touch on
I can touch on it for sure. Well, we need to recognize that that's a small amount of money over a significant number of years. And so two of the things that we've already identified are the recruitment and the training of IRCA assessors. That is the piece of work that we have been commissioned to do here in Nova Scotia. And that'll be about $1 million over the next 3 years. Similarly, our colleagues in Ontario have been commissioned to lead the training of lawyers and judges as it relates to IRCAs. That's going to be a slightly smaller amount of money over the next 3 years. But here in Nova Scotia, we are a unique jurisdiction in that when an IRCA is ordered, the Provincial Department of Justice actually pays for that IRCA. In other jurisdictions, when IRCAs are requested, the defense has to find the money for those assessments. And so I think that there is money being allotted for paying for these IRCAs and the other related costs of implementing this project across the country. I would say that living in a just and peaceful society, these are reasonable costs. And so I think that when we think about how these investments will be made and the work that will be done, led by legal aid directorates across the country, and similar organizations to DPAD as they exist across the country, and the recruitment of these individual assessors, that we will, that's I think how the money will be apportioned over the next several years.
Yeah, I'm good.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So seeing that there are no other questions, thank you very much for the media for being here. Thank you for the Delmore Buddy Day Learning Institute for allowing us to be in this beautiful space of Afrocentricity. And we're just going to pause for a moment to get a photo op of our speakers so that we can have that posted. So if the media would like to take pictures, anybody else in the audience would like to, we welcome you. We're going to move things here so we can take a picture. And again, we thank our audience and for participants, our members from DPAD for coming here to support us. And all the information that has been taken in today is going to advance people of African ancestry in the justice system. We will see a change. We will see a difference. And we thank everyone who has been a part of that over the last 400 years. It's been a long journey, but we've come this far so far, and we're going moving forward much more. So again, thank you for coming today to support the African Nova Scotian Decade for People of African Descent Coalition and this important announcement. And in the way going forward, our contact information is in your press kits. If you want to reach out to any of our speakers, we'll be more than happy to give you more information. So again, thank you very much on behalf of the ANSDPAD Coalition, and we thank you and have a wonderful afternoon. Or still morning. Thank you.